Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heather Asiala, and I'm the Communications Program Manager for the Pulte Institute for Global Development here at the University of Notre Dame. On behalf of my colleagues at the Pulte Institute and the larger university, I'm delighted to welcome you to our final session of Populorum Progressio, the Catholic economic alternative as an elixir for the Nigerian economic crisis. Over the last 3 days, we have heard from economists, theologians, theorists, and Nigerian policymakers discussing how Catholic social teaching can play a role in Nigerian development. If this is your first session with us, welcome. And if you are returning, welcome back. We are delighted to have you here for this discussion. Today, we will end our summit with an expert panel who will explore how the Church's rights-based approach to poverty can be translated into policy action in Nigeria. As an integral part of Notre Dame's Keough School of Global Affairs, the Pulte Institute addresses global poverty and inequality through policy, practice, and partnership. We are pleased to be hosting this summit in partnership with the Catholic Diocese of Ondo and our friends at the De Nicholas Center for Ethics and Culture, which is the leading center for scholarly reflection within the Catholic moral and intellectual tradition here at Notre Dame. We have had excellent attendance and participation for this summit, with over 150 people joining us from all over the world. We appreciate your patience if any technical issues do arise during the session, but I know that Francis and his media team have done an excellent job thus far. We will conclude today's session with a group discussion and Q&A. So if you're joining us virtually, you can leave a comment in the chat box and we will try to address as many questions as time allows at the end. We are very honored to have a special guest with us to open today's session. It is my pleasure to introduce Bishop Jude Aragundade, the Catholic Bishop of the Ondo Diocese. The bishop has his master's degree and PhD in Education Administration from Fordham University, New York, and is a member of the Education Committee and heads the Finance Committee of the Nigerian Bishops' Conference. Welcome, Bishop Jude.
Oh, thank you. Well, it is a joy to join this Zoom meeting, and I'm glad to welcome everybody to this beautiful section in which we will be discussing about the problems that we are faced with in Nigeria, especially at this time of economic depression. And the Catholic Church in Nigeria has been in the forefront of trying to bring experts together to brainstorm on how to survive the present situation. And I know that Father Fidelis has been involved in the studies at Notre Dame University. And we look forward to him to give us the gem of what he's doing at Notre Dame, and also to be able to give us a kind of platform in which we can begin to think together, brainstorm together, and see how we can begin to resolve the situation of our time here in Nigeria. I know a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, I started the Youth Empowerment Program. And the program has impacted the lives of many of our young people. Precisely more than 250 young people have been empowered, and they are doing so well in their various areas of human development and entrepreneurship. So I'm glad to be here this morning, and I welcome all of you in the hall to this program. And I thank Father Fidelis for making this possible for us to talk and to see what we can do as a diocese to begin to contribute to the quality of life and uplifting many of our young people from poverty and families from poverty, and probably also to improve what we're already doing in the area of human development and poverty alleviation. Try to make sure that we begin to expand whatever we're already doing and even adding more knowledge, more human formation into helping to solve the problem of our country at this time. I probably, if you ask me some questions, I will be able to at least give a clear intervention so that people may know at this point I don't really have a focus. If you can let me have some.
So can I go ahead with that?
Yes, please go ahead, Father.
It is my duty to introduce the panelists, and after the introduction, they will take it up from there. And after the back and forth, the question and answer, the bishop will come back to give the final comments before the end of the day. So I will introduce the panelists in the order of their presentation. Just like we did yesterday, we'll have a theologian to make the first presentation, and will be followed by an economist to give a global perspective of our discussion for today. And after the two presenters, we now narrow it down to Nigeria, where we have two other presenters from Nigeria. So I'm going to introduce Professor Peter Casarella, who is a professor of theology at the Duke Divinity School since 2020. Before Duke, he was a professor of theology at the University of Notre Dame. And I'm proud to say he's my advisor, and also was the founding director of the Paul's Center for World Catholicism and Intercultural Theology in Chicago. Professor Casarella's areas of interest are systematic theology, world religion, and world church. And he has numerous scholarly articles on topics around medieval Christianism, contemporary theological aesthetics, intercultural thought, and the Hispanic Latino presence in the U.S. Catholic Church. He has published a monograph, Word as Bread, Language and Theology in Nicolas of Cusa, and co-edited Cuerpo de Cristo, the Hispanic presence in the U.S. Catholic Church, Founding Beauty in the Other, Theological Reflection Across Religious Traditions, and The Whole is Greater Than Its Parts, Ecumenism and Interreligious Encounters in the Age of Pope Francis. His current project is The God of the People, a Latinx theology. Professor Casarella will be reflecting today on the theology of moral economics, the Catholic narrative of human development, economic rights, and culture of life. Professor, when it's your turn to speak, you have 12 minutes for your presentation. Welcome, Professor. Next to him will be Professor Joseph Kapowski, who is the David F. and Erin M. Seng Foundation Professor of Economics of the University of Notre Dame. His current research focuses on growth, development, and international economics, with an emphasis on structural change, finance and development, schooling and growth, microfinance, explaining international relative price patterns, and the role of inventories in international trade. He has published scholarly articles in many journals and is an associate editor at the Journal of Human Capital, a research associate of the National Bureau of Economic Research, and a fellow and board member of the Bureau of Research in Economic Analysis of Development. He has consulted for the Federal Reserve Banks of Chicago, Minneapolis, and St. Louis in the US, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and is a senior advisor and board member to the research department of the Central Bank of Armenia. He is also currently a consultant to the US Catholic Bishops' Conference Committee on Domestic Justice and Human Development. Professor Kapowski will be reflecting on the principles of moral economics and his relationship with the Catholic social teachings. Also, he would make an intervention on the Catholic narrative of the person and the common good from an economic perspective and how that intersects with economic rights and the proposal for a culture of life in Africa. Following Professor Kapowski will be narrowing down to the Nigerian context. To initiate that process for us will be Professor Pat Utomi, whom we know very well, an economist and the founder of Center for Values and Leadership, and a former presidential and governorship aspirant. Professor Utomi is a noted political economist, professor of entrepreneurship, business angel, and a celebrated boardroom veteran. He studied at the famous University of Nigeria, Nsukka, and had his PhD from the University of Indiana, Bloomington, at the age of 26. Professor Utomi has served as a presidential advisor at the age of 27. He has been a top executive in manufacturing, serving as the chief operating officer of Volkswagen Nigeria, and in the social enterprise sector as founder of the Center for Values and Leadership. He has served as a director of the Center for Applied Economics at the Lagos Business School, regarded for the ease with which it traverses several sectors of economic activity and bridges the knowing-doing gap. He has been at the forefront of founding several iconic brands and pathfinding Nigerian enterprises, including the country's first internet provider. He was voted in as the Vanguard Silverbird Television Pool 2009 as one of the top 10 living legends. He's a fellow of many professional organizations like the Institute of Public Relations, Institute of Management and Management Consultants. His academic interest is multidisciplinary, and he has received several degrees and certification in discipline, including policy economics, public management, just to mention a few. Professor Utomi today will be reflecting for 12 minutes on the origin of the laws of moral economics, even in Nigeria, the implication of the presence of intelligent public dialogue on subsistence right and policy, and the history of economic policies in Nigeria and the consequences of those policies. After Professor Utomi will be Mr. Ben Akabweze, who is the Director General, the Budget Office of the Federation, Ministry of Budget and National Planning. Mr. Ben's reappointment by the President in his second term tour of duty in the Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and Planning, where he had served as a special advisor to Mr. President on planning between February 2015 and 2016 of June 2016. Prior to this appointment, he served as the Lagos State Commissioner for Economic Planning and Budget and the Chief Executive of NAL Bank PLC, Executive Director of Sterling Bank PLC. A distinguished banker, accountant, economist, and administrator with over 25 years of experience. He holds first-class BSc degree in accounting from the University of Lagos and an advanced management program certificate from the Lagos Business School. He is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, and a fellow of the Institute of Credit Administrators. Today, Mr. Kapowski will be representing the federal government to some extent to respond to some concerns, and also he would reflect on the alignment of the Nigerian economic policies with the universal notion of subsistence, right, and culture of life. He would also have 12 minutes for his presentation. I will now yield the ground to Professor Peter Casarella.
Your Excellency, Bishop Chu, distinguished colleagues, Father Fidelis, and honored guests at the Domus Pacis, good afternoon. It's a true privilege and a great honor to be with you in the capital of the Ondo State. I read that Ondo State is called the Sunshine State, and having recently made a move from Northern Indiana to the state of North Carolina, I feel very much at home in this webinar, having chosen Sunshine myself. The title of my remarks is, How do you exercise free and responsible charity within a global economy? I will establish in 6 steps the path from Pope Paul VI to Pope Francis that shows us what makes a moral economy moral. Basically, I will show how the impetus in Paul VI's Populorum Progressio to establish integral human development manifests itself today in Pope Francis' call to develop an economy of the people. Throughout this presentation, I would like to maintain that the key to integral human development lies neither in personal transformation by itself, nor in social transformation by itself, but rather in their interdependence. Personal transformation and social transformation are by nature joined in an interlocking relationship. So the first step is to quick glance at Populorum Progressio, the encyclical of Paul VI from March 1967, 2 years after the conclusion of Gaudium et Spes and the Second Vatican Council. It was influenced in an initial way by the notion of integral human development that had been developed by the French philosopher Jacques Maritain. And also importantly, another French influence was the Dominican and social scientists whose method of integral development was adapted to help the poor in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, namely Louis Joseph Lebret. The point I think that I want to take from Populorum Progressio is that the temporal dimensions of human existence and the spiritual dimensions of human existence are distinct, but that there's a point of intersection that joins them. So a key text would be section 14, in which Paul VI writes that development cannot be restricted to economic growth alone. To be authentic, development must be well-rounded. It must foster the development of each human being and of the whole human being. In citing Lebret, he writes, "We cannot allow economics to be separated from human realities, nor development from the civilization in which it takes place. What counts for us is the human person as such, each individual human being, each human group, and humanity as a whole." So moving outward from the individual to the social entity, the human group, to the global reality of humanity as a whole, the person, spiritual and material together, the personal dimension of economics is highlighted. Moving very quickly, because I only have a little time, we're going to jump ahead 24 years later to the third social encyclical of Pope John Paul II, Centesimus Annus, 1991, 2 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Here, St. John Paul II looks at the moral question of the enterprise, either a small or a large business, and gives us a theology of free enterprise, saying that free enterprise must be developed at the service of a society of persons. St. John Paul II insists that the integral, number 43, Centesimus Annus, the integral development of the human person proceeds through the dignity of work, and the dignity of work does not impede, but rather promotes the greater productivity and efficiency of work itself. And I think the takeaway here is that a business cannot be considered only as a society of capital goods. Free enterprise that produces a society of capital goods is here blessed, but not without restrictions. I continue. A business cannot be considered only a society of capital goods. It is also a society of persons in which people participate in different ways and with specific responsibilities, whether they supply the necessary capital for the company's activities or take part in such activities through their labor. To achieve these goals, there is still need for a broad associated workers' movement directed towards the liberation and promotion of the whole person. So again, a personalist principle for global economics with a normative vision of the common good in view. Now, jumping ahead to Caritas in Veritate, the encyclical of Pope Benedict XVI from June 29th, 2009. So 42 years after Populorum Progressio and 18 years after Centesium Insanus. First, one preliminary point about Caritas. It's in English, it's truth or charity and truth. One preliminary point, because part of our agenda at this conference is to think about the culture of life. Pope Benedict says the church, and this is echoing Paul VI, who was not only the author of Populorum Progressio, but also of Humanae Vitae. The church forcefully maintains a link between life ethics and social ethics, fully aware that society lacks solid foundations when on the one hand, it asserts values such as dignity of the person, justice and peace, and on the other hand, radically acts contrary to by allowing or tolerating a variety of ways in which human life is devalued and violated, especially where it is weak or marginalized. So the unborn and the poor are both going to be defended with equal vigor in this vision of charity and truth. Now to a second text from Caritas in Veritate, from number 36. Pope Benedict wants us to think about bringing the love of God, the grace of God, and a principle of economic gratuity into the global system of economics. This is the first encyclical written after the economic crisis of 2008. He says, Pope Benedict says, the great challenge before us, accentuated by the problems of development in this global era and made even more urgent by the economic and financial crisis, is to demonstrate in thinking and behavior not only that traditional principles of social ethics like transparency, honesty, and responsibility cannot be ignored or attenuated, but also that in commercial relationships, the principle of gratuitousness and the logic of gift as an expression of fraternity can and must find their place within normal economic activity. This is a demand both of charity and of truth. Now, in that encyclical, following Stefano Zamagni, the principle of civil economy is evoked, and following Kara Lubitsch and her followers in the Focolare, the economy of communion is evoked as concrete examples of bringing gratuitousness into the economy of exercising charity freely and responsibly. And I can come back to that later in the Q&A if you like. Pope Francis inaugurated his pontificate with an apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel. So our fourth step would then be to briefly consider, 4 years after Caritas in Veritate, charity as the principle of both micro and macro relationships, according to Pope Francis. He writes in number 205, we need to be convinced that charity is the principle not only of micro relationships with friends, with family members, or within small groups, but also of macro relationships, social, economic, and political ones. And then he says, I beg the Lord to grant us more politicians who are genuinely disturbed by the state of society, the people, the lives of the poor. It is vital that government leaders and financial leaders take heed and broaden their horizons, working to ensure that all citizens have dignified work, education, and healthcare. Why not turn to God and ask him to inspire their plans? So the notion of integral human development, first put forward in Populorum Progressio, is here expanded to see a relationship between micro relationships of charity and macro relationships of charity. And briefly, just to show the importance of this from Africa, I'd like to recall a quote from Cardinal John Onaiyekan in his 2002 address to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, when he talks about the macro relationships in relationship to Africa. And he said, on the economic level, Africa is practically absent from the negotiating table when all is said and done. We simply have to accept whatever rules and conditions are imposed on the continent in the process of economic exchanges. It is said that the terms of these exchanges get more and more unfavorable as the years go by. Cardinal Onaiyekan wrote in 2002, the cocoa farmer in Africa received more than 5 times for his cocoa in the 1960s than he is receiving today in real terms. And there is no effective way of bargaining for a better deal. This economic imbalance translates itself into political terms. The rulers, even when they are sincere and wise, find it difficult to hold their ground against the national interests of the big powers. Worse still, very often those who control economic power have ways of determining the political direction in the weaker nations. If we add to all this the corruption and greed of many of the African leaders, it is no wonder that the lot of the poor masses on our continent continues to degenerate. Cardinal Onaiyekan speaking to the relationship of micro and macro relationships in Africa. Now, for reasons of time, I'm going to skip over Laudato Si, which obviously has a lot of important insights on the relationship of poverty and the environment. But let me come to the last step, Fratelli Tutti. Fratelli Tutti introduces, Pope Francis from October 3rd, 2020, introduces the idea of a popular economy and also gives us insights about how to deal with the problem of religious pluralism that we have in the United States and that you also have in a different way in the Ondo state, as I understand it. At any rate, in number 169 of Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis writes, in some closed and monochrome economic approaches, for example, there seems to be no place for popular movements. These movements manage various forms of popular economy and community production. What is needed is a model of social, political, and economic participation that can include popular movements and invigorate local, national, and international governing structures. Pope Francis famously defends land, labor, and lodging as values that are promoted, and social friendship. And the notion of social friendship here, I don't have time to go into it, but was first developed in conversation with the Grand Imam, Ahmad al-Tayeb, whom he met in Abu Dhabi. So the notion of social fraternity in this encyclical is a fruit of Catholic Muslim dialogue. So to conclude, I'm trying to show that micro personal relationships and macro political and economic relationships need to be seen in their interdependence in the recent Catholic social teaching. And 3 more small points. One central concern links all 4 popes. The economy and the question of what constitutes authentic economic development is a question that has an implicitly spiritual dimension, even theological dimension. Secondly, lived theology cannot bracket off moral questions that pertain to the economy, for these questions pertain to the common good of all people. Life ethics and social ethics go together. We cannot choose some issues for our cafeteria tray and ignore others and leave them at the food counter. We need to think about the globalization of gratuitousness and greed in a systematic fashion. And finally, I end with a call to think about intergenerational solidarity. The pressing question is not just what we are going to do to fix the economy today, to make it more efficient and to generate a higher GDP. Rather, we need to ask ourselves, what kind of economy and what form of economic flourishing will we as nations and as a human fraternity hand over to our children and grandchildren? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Kessler. Professor Kapowski, is now your turn.
Thank you, Father. And thank you all for inviting me. It's an honor to take part of this. I've never been to Nigeria. I've never done any research on Nigeria, but I've benefited a lot from Nigeria. A few years ago, I met Father Fidelis, who's a huge benefit to our community here at Notre Dame. About a month ago, my local parish received an associate pastor who is Nigerian. And just this week, my basketball team was led to their first championship by a Nigerian Greek. So I'm thankful for Nigeria in many ways. Since I'm not an expert in Nigeria, I wanted to start by, I am a development economist, though. I wanted to start by thinking about some of the principles in Catholic social thought and how they apply to some of the challenges the Nigerian economy faces. In order to do this, I'm going to go over first some of those moral principles, discuss a little bit of the state of affairs in Nigeria, although others in the panel are better experts on this, and then try to connect the social principles to some of these challenges to a moral economy faced in Nigeria and other countries in sub-Saharan Africa. So what are the key moral principles? I teach a course in economics and Catholic social thought. The key moral principles to consider, I think first and foremost, is the dignity of man, and how this relates to the economy. The dignity of man is, the importance of each individual is the priority of persons over things, and a proper state of understanding what are ends and what are means. And so the economy is a means, and the economy serves man. And not only is the economy a means, but the output of the economy, the temporal goods that the economy produces, are means to an end. And that end is the good of society and the good of man. Second is the universal destination of the earth's goods, that God's creation was meant for everyone. And this implies economic rights. Especially given the title of the conference, the right to subsist, which is a pressing right for many in low-income countries especially. The third, which is related, is the preferential option for the poor. So beyond justice and beyond satisfying economic rights of the poor, we need charity for the poor as well. A fourth principle is really a set of principles involving the social nature of man. Solidarity, which is the social charity or friendship that Peter talked about. Subsidiarity, which is a respect for the individual and smaller societies, and the importance of the family in particular. And in these things, I think this is a strength of Nigeria, although I've never been to Nigeria, but many developing countries in Africa that I've been to. The family is very strong. Small communities are very strong. There is a great deal of cohesion in these communities and solidarity. And yet we know that there are many ethnic divisions, and there are high levels of inequality that put a strain on solidarity. So that's a very important principle. And the final principle is the common good. And the question behind the common good is what Peter was also addressing is, what does integral human development really look like? What is the role of the church in integral human development? What's the role of the state? What is the role of the family? And what not only is the role of the government, but what's the role of the government at different levels? Again, here, one has to keep in mind the vision of integral human development, and that the economy must not only serve man, but not serve man materially, but enable man toward his higher purpose, which acknowledges man's higher dignity and man's higher purpose here in this world. Those are really the guiding principles. Let me touch a bit on the economic state of affairs in many developing countries that I'm better aware of, but also in Nigeria. Nigeria is the biggest economy in Africa. It's also the biggest country in Africa from a population standpoint. It is one of the few countries, it's big population, 200 million people, but it's also densely populated, which is different than other economies in Africa. Many economies in Africa are much more sparsely populated. Population density in Nigeria is comparable to that of Germany, however. So it doesn't seem to be overly populated, where population seems to be would be a strain on economic development. Certainly, it's not a strain on Germany, and it's a comparable population density to Germany. Like many countries in Africa, Nigeria has shown very solid, very good economic growth in this millennium. 2.9% per year of real GDP per capita is outstanding growth. Now, that's a measure of aggregates. That's not, it's not, China growth or South Korea growth, but it's a very good growth. It's much higher, for example, than the United States. Nigeria right now is a middle income country, somewhere between the lower middle income countries and the higher middle income countries that the World Bank associates. GDP per capita, real GDP per capita, about 5,000 per person. Now, obviously, annually, that's a lot more than the typical Nigerian lives on. But this is roughly similar to the average income per capita in the United States in around 1880. And it's higher than many African countries. So Nigeria does well in that sense. Nigeria has oil as a resource. It has a lot going for it besides oil. It has a sizable manufacturing sector. It has a sizable service sector, including export services that come in part from the high level of development in the cities. It's a center for banking. It's a center for business services, telecom, etc., and could potentially be a center for many things in Africa on that front. It's the only, I think, African country that I know of that paid off its debt. It got into a lot of debt funding infrastructure in the 70s when oil prices were high, and then had trouble paying it off, but paid off all of its international debt to the Paris Club, which is a remarkable feat. Those are all, good strengths and that has freed up money for poverty programs. So those are all strengths of the Nigerian economy, and a lot of potential. Not everything's a strength. There are some challenges. Very high poverty, and it's a euphemism to say they're challenges. They're human crises. Very high poverty rates. 40% the population, despite the high growth, still live in poverty. The high growth has played a huge role in dropping poverty rates. 10, 15 years ago, those poverty rates were 60%. So they've dropped, from 60% to 40%, which shouldn't be poo-pooed, but obviously it's a big issue to address. Second big issue are the high levels of exclusion in society that this poverty rate reflects. There is geographic disparity. Certain areas are much more developed than others, as especially in urban-rural disparity. There, of course, is the Muslim versus Christian division. There are ethnic divisions and social conflict. Women are excluded in the Nigerian economy and perhaps in the Nigerian society more generally, but I don't know enough to really speak strongly on that. The ethnic and in particular the religious divisions cause areas of disagreement in thinking about man's higher purpose and even thinking about moral truths. And many of the areas of disagreement not from within the country, but from outside of the country and outside influences. And that's a challenge for Nigeria and for African cultures. High levels of corruption, typical of many developing countries. Particularly high costs of doing business, according to the World Bank's surveys and indexes. 30% of the people are still engaged in agriculture and subsistence agriculture, which is very low productivity. And that explains a lot of the high poverty rates in Nigeria. And in particular, Nigeria has gone over the past 40 years from being a very big exporter of agricultural goods to being a big importer. Maybe that's okay. It's a highly densely populated area, especially relative to its neighbors. So importing agricultural goods when you have a thriving service economy and a thriving manufacturing economy may not be the biggest thing, the biggest concern in the world. That might just be comparative advantage. There's a high rate of informality in Nigeria. Again, this is typical of many low-income countries or developing countries. Informality matters because one is that it lowers the tax base. And so governments have a harder time funding programs that are needed. And so both corruption and this small tax base really inhibit the ability of the government to finance inclusive investments. Overall, I would say that the economy needs the growth. A lot of this poverty alleviation has come from growth. So the economy needs more growth, but it needs inclusive growth, and it needs to do so while maintaining the strength of its families and communities. Again, so the economy must serve all people better, especially the needs of the poor. Another challenge is that government must serve the common good better. I think, but this is a question, is this really a question about government or the economy, or is this really a question about the society in general, where more solidarity is needed in society? And is this something where the church can play an instrumental role? There's a need for more justice, but also more freedom in the economy. So lower costs of doing business, lower levels of corruption would promote a more dynamic economy that helps people help themselves at a local level. Nigeria's population, I mentioned that. Nigeria's population is a strength. Compared to the challenges many countries in Africa face, there's sizable markets in Nigeria. There's large cities. It's not just Lagos, 10 cities of over 1 million people in Nigeria. There's a tremendous asset there. And Nigeria's diversity could also be a tremendous asset. Can we make Nigeria's diversity to be a strength and inclusive while still avoiding sort of counterproductive policies? A final challenge is connecting agriculture, this subsidiary agriculture, to more markets, input markets, output markets, using infrastructure and education, connecting in rural areas to urban areas. So, a big issue. How am I doing on time? Do I still have a couple minutes?
You have like 2 minutes to go.
Perfect. So I think the question is, can we have economic growth in Nigeria, inclusive economic growth and transformation, while maintaining strong communities and families? The West does not have the same level of strong communities and families. I don't think you really want to follow the path of the West, but inclusive growth is needed. I'll give you a few tensions. One tension, the land tenure rights in Nigeria and in many countries. Some places there aren't strong rights, but they lead to small plots of land for farmers. They lead to less agribusiness. What does this do? This leads to more stable communities because everybody has, people have wealth distributed more, less within rural areas inequality, but it also leads to low levels of agricultural productivity and more difficulties in bringing forth the more productive modern technologies. There is a second tension. Promoting food security, which is a goal of in Nigeria and a goal of the Millennium Development Challenges, has involved closing borders to imports to protect the domestic agriculture and develop domestic agriculture. But one of the things this does is it leads to very little within Africa agricultural trade, and trade is a way of improving agricultural productivity and ensuring food security. A third tension is that agricultural productivity growth, if it occurs, leads to increases in rural-urban migration. It will lead to drops in agricultural prices, that the popes lamented, that the cardinal lamented, and that leads to rural-urban migration. That'll happen especially when markets are domestic. Again, the large cities in Nigeria are a strength, but rapidly growing cities are and also evidence of growth, but they lead to issues. Housing becomes an issue, slums become an issue, crime, pollution. The United States faced, I mentioned that the income per capita is close to what the United States was in 1880. Many of these challenges the United States went through. Multi-ethnic cities growing, although the US was often coming from other countries. There's certainly challenges, but they can become a strength. I think there's a big need for the church. There's a big need for civil society, social organizations. When you have massive numbers of young people entering urban areas, to make sure that you protect the faith, the morals in the city and the communities, and you establish new communities. Finally, this was touched upon. There are external pressures from globalization, external pressures for automation, and cultural aspects that pressure the good, the strengths of Nigerian society. So, you know, can Nigeria stay pro-family? Can they be inclusive of women without kind of buying into the ideologies of the West that have really led to a decline in the family and big problems in community cohesion that we see in many countries, advanced economies? So I think that there are big challenges, but there are strong opportunities in Nigeria and the rest of Africa as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Kapowski. Professor Pato told me you have your 12 minutes now.
Well, thank you very much. Let me say that it's such a great privilege to be able to join in this conversation. And my Lord and panelists, I'd just like to begin by saying that at the heart of the challenge of development in Nigeria is tracking the history of how the Nigerian economy has more or less evolved. Back in the 80s and 70s, I used to turn often to a book that had just been published back then. It was titled The Moral Economy of the Peasant. Scott's book essentially opened with Tony's metaphor, which is that a peasant is so deep in water that even a ripple can drown him. And in many cases, what we're dealing with in the evolution of the Nigerian economy has been essentially how that thin line that exists for the average person has been pushed by policy in one direction or the other. At the time of colonial domination of Nigeria, we basically had moral economies of peasants in which you married into a family, you know, not far from you, but different enough, such that if the windstorm blew down your barn, your in-laws would take you in, and they would ensure that you had New Year seedlings for the next farming season. This kind of moral economy provided the basis for coexistence, such that, you know, if you as you didn't have storage of value, you know, you had no insurance, none of those things, but your in-laws took care of you. And so it was this moral economy that was at the heart of the nature of the family and the development of the people. However, with colonial domination, the Industrial Revolution in Europe requiring raw materials from the colonies, the thrust of policy was to encourage cash crops. Now, cash crops by displacing food security to some extent. And so cocoa was introduced, cotton was into granules, and these were grown significantly by these new farmers. And it led to the building up of significant reserves. the Nigerian governments, the regional governments as they were at the time, built up these marketing boards. These marketing boards were to provide extension support, essentially purchase the produce of the farmers and export them on their behalf. But the marketing boards captured most of the value that was created in that chain, and essentially the farmers managed to thrive, but a lot of the value was exported from rural areas to urban areas to build not skyscrapers, to build multi-story buildings and create new urban elite conditions without the benefit of those who were doing most of the production. Anyway, there was a quick transition from that cash crop economy, which was supported, by the way, by a web of, if you will, colonial policies, besides just creating the marketing boards. As independence approached, self-government began, and there was a recognition that colonial Nigeria did not industrialize the country at all, even though most of the raw materials were going to sustain industry in Europe. There's hardly any industry in Nigeria besides, I guess, Federated Motor Industries that put panels around truck chassis, and I guess Nigerian breweries at Bali to get some alcohol to distribute. But by 1956-57, the new leaders of Nigeria began to compete intensively around ethnic nationality groups, but who will most bring progress to their people. And this led to a rush to industrialization. A place today in Lagos, it's called the Ikeja, became really the first industrial estate that was set up by the government of the Western region. And competitively, the government of Eastern region responded quickly with industrial estates in Aba and Port Harcourt, the Transamadi layout, and then the North with Kakuri in Kaduna as the Bombay estate was developing in Kano. So this intense rivalry led to rapid industrialization in the 60s in Nigeria. And this industrialization increased the urbanization in Nigeria, a very rapid process, which then went through a remarkable turn with the discovery of oil, crude oil, in commercial quantities about 56, 57 in a place called Oloibiri in today's Bayelsa State. Now, very, very quickly, the effect of oil would define the Nigerian economy going forward. The rent elite that came out of oil essentially created new kinds of demands. I don't have the time to go into all the effects, the Dutch disease and other factors that led to the non-tradable goods sector of the economy suffering so badly as, rising in significance, and other sectors suffering so badly as most of the money earned from oil went into construction of all kinds of infrastructure that, and when oil prices, volatile as they were, went down, it immediately led to left their farms to come, they left the Leoluji in Ondo State to come to be messengers in NMPC or to work in construction sites for firms like Julius Berger. When oil prices went down and the government could not pay, they were laid off, they couldn't return to their farms, and they became part of this urban mass with all the challenges that it brought with it. Well, clearly, this evolution, I think is important in understanding how Nigeria today, having gone into deindustrialization without being fully industrialized as a result of this impact of oil on the Nigerian economy, has a huge population that is significantly unemployed. 2 years ago, the Brookings Institution in a study showed that Nigeria had overtaken India in terms of the numbers of the absolute poor in any country. And this is part of the phenomenon that has come from that displacing of many people from rural agriculture into an urban area driven essentially by oil revenues, which has been volatile. What has happened essentially is that the dignity of the human person has suffered very much in the face of this increasing poverty. Besides the Bill and Melinda Gates, besides the Brookings Institution study, the Bill and Melinda Gates study shows that in the next couple of years, Nigeria and Congo DRC, which is another resource-rich country in Africa, will produce 40% of the poorest people on the planet. And so the challenge of human dignity, the challenge that essentially gave us the first encyclical Rerum Novarum from Pope Leo XIII in the time of Industrial Revolution in Europe is what we are living with. And there is a great need to come up with strategies that will help restore the dignity of the human person in this kind of crushing poverty. Well, one of the things that happened with the policy choices that we made during the so-called oil boom was essentially that we created a debt overhang, led to structural crisis in Nigeria. This debt crisis that we had back in the 80s essentially would lead us to a structural adjustment program. Now, this structural adjustment program, which came out of the Washington Consensus, created its problems. I was one of those who supported the Washington Consensus because I've been, for a long time, focused on the fact that one of the things that oil did is to take us away from production and focus us on not just consumption, but an obsession with revenues rather than production. I was part of a conference in France in 1996 in which it was said that Africa must produce or die. I mean, those were the years of Afro-pessimism, as it was called, and because all that was seen of Africa was famines, wars, and all of this. How do we switch the mindset from revenues to production? That, for me, is the critical question of the Nigerian economic order of today. The triumph of politics, as I like to call it, has allowed a small political elite to focus so obsessively on revenues and sharing revenues, whereas in truth, there are a number of issues that we need to deal with, from this whole oil, if you want to call it, curse. And one of them is a point raised about intergenerational solidarity. And then the second point I want to, because my time is very short, close, is on the principle of subsidiarity and how it fits into the kind of economic choices that we must make now. And this is local subsidiarity, not global. I make the point about intergenerational solidarity in the sense that what is happening in Nigeria is that mineral resources that are available to all generations of Nigerians are being consumed by this generation of Nigerians without much thought to the justice of the fact that this is a gift from God for all generations of Nigerians. I mean, part of the way that this has been managed in many countries is to create these so-called sovereign wealth funds. If you look at a country like Botswana that grew rapidly, fastest growing economy in the world in the 70s from diamond exports, and they created this future fund. I have argued for years in Nigeria that what we must do is to have 3 pots of account from revenues that come from mineral deposits, crude oil, and that this should be a base one in which you take a very small portion. In the case of crude oil, in my computations at the time, no more than $30 from a barrel earning, at that time oil prices at about 100, would go into the distributable pool funds, the so-called federation account that is shared between the tiers of government in Nigeria. The portion from about 30 to about 60 to go into a stabilization fund that you can draw on to keep budget on an even keel, so to speak, when oil prices go down. And then a future fund, the sovereign wealth fund part of it, that is invested and is available to create value for generations long after this generation. Failure to deal with that, I think, has been an enormous injustice to the Nigerian people of all generations. But very importantly, it has taken us away from focusing on being able to produce, to give dignity to work and the quality of lives that people live. In that regard, I have argued for some time now that we need to make a choice in terms of how we build our economy that is focused on what I guess economists these days would call the latent comparative advantage of the country, where we will take factor endowments of the country in the various local areas and try and build global value chains, domination or big role in the global value chains from those factor endowments. This will go down, and then here's a role that the church has played and can play very well in this. Traditionally, the social sectors, education and healthcare, have been areas of apostolate in which the church has had enormous impact on society. The thrust of my thinking is that if we build those around the endowments, the factor endowments of local areas, if, for example, in Ondo, the particular church in Ondo, my Lord being there, says to his education committee, Ondo is endowed with cocoa, is endowed with X, Y, and Z. Primary education from get-go focuses on how to prepare that rural boy or girl, and not only for general liberal arts education, but to understand cocoa, to understand how value can be added to cocoa, to understand entrepreneurship around the cocoa value chain, such that by the time that young person is through secondary school, he's able to create wealth. He's able to, or she is able to add value to the process that would make their quality of life much better, and truly such that the production that is coming out of those endowments is changing the quality of life of people. Unfortunately, right now, that is not happening because the center dominates everything: economic planning, economic policy, and the mindset is in sharing, distribution of wealth, not distribution, sorry, extracting as much as you can from this sharing, this rent. And what has therefore happened is that government policy has impoverished the people. I will close with one example that I like to reemphasize, just to show how wrong-headed our policies have been. There's a big quarrel over restructuring of the Federation of Nigeria. There's a fight over how much of oil revenues people who have political power can extract, even if they don't bear the burden of oil production, the damage to the environment, displacement of possibilities. Now, what this has unfortunately done that the people who are arguing for have not seen is that it is taken away from the capacity to produce in those areas. The more, back in the 60s, we had more local governments, for example, in southern Nigeria than in northern Nigeria. But as oil revenues came, political power in northern Nigeria caused a third tier of government, local governments, to become fiscal transfers. With this, local governments could get a lot of revenues, and more local governments kept getting created in northern Nigeria until we now have 774 local governments, and nearly 500 come from the old northern Nigeria. And yet, in reality, northern Nigeria has become much, much poorer than it used to be in the 60s. And this is very simple, the lottery effect. Those who get money
Hello,
who are
Professor.
poor from lottery
Professor.
usually end up poorer than they used to be. So I'll close there because I know my time has run out and it's a subject that I like to. But at the heart of it is that if we're going to give dignity to man, we must move from revenues to production and be local. The principle of subsidiarity must apply. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Padatomi. Now, Mr. Ben Akabo, is your turn. Your 12 minutes starts.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be able to join the panel this afternoon in this, what I consider very important, discussion. Excuse me. And I'm going to be speaking, more particularly about Nigeria. And since, as you said in the introduction, I sort of represent government, a lot of my commentary will come from the perspective of government's role and how it's fared. The right of citizens to life and subsistence are basically universal. And in the case of Nigeria, the 1999 Constitution seeks to guarantee, such, rights. Indeed, our Constitution, states clearly, the fundamental objectives and directive, principles of state policy. And it states there that the security and welfare of the people will be the primary purpose of government. And, government is therefore, required to direct its policies towards ensuring equitable distribution of resources, provision of adequate shelter and food, old age care and pensions, on employment and unemployment and sick benefits, and welfare of the disabled, all of those sort of things. Government is also expected to implement policies to create opportunities for citizens to secure means of livelihood and suitable employment. Government is expected to provide adequate medical and health care facilities to protect children, young persons, and the aged against exploitation and neglect. Government is expected to provide public assistance in deserving cases or other conditions of need, and to ensure equal and adequate educational opportunities at all levels. And through the years, I think Professor Tommy taken us through a bit of the history of Nigeria's economic development. Over the years, different governments have had to establish policies to address these objectives. Okay. I currently have the privilege of heading the budget office of the Federation, and usually all of these government policies ultimately usually boil down to money. Money needs to be spent to achieve these objectives. Not everything, requires any expenditure of money, but mostly that's what it entails. And so what you find that government's policies and programs and projects are mostly implemented through the annual, budget. I hold strongly the view that a government's budget is a moral document. Because when you look at the budget of any country, you can tell who and what that country values by examining its budget. And, so I'll make the call when you look at Nigeria's budget, whether it really then reflects the level of value that we should be putting on the, human being, on the citizens. But government's, policy priorities change sometimes, forced upon it by extraneous forces. Last year, for instance, when COVID-19 hit town, healthcare rose sharply to the top of the, of the ladder in terms of allocation of, of resources. But generally speaking, the priorities of the current administration in Nigeria include ensuring public safety and national security, investment in critical infrastructure, which is then, expected to, give impetus to economic growth, and then investing in human capital, development and mostly education, health, and social, development. For the 2021 budget specifically, the key objectives of the budget were stated to be as follows. One, strengthening the macroeconomic environment and the resilience of the economy. And two, accelerating inclusive economic growth. Three, investing in critical infrastructure, human capital development, and enabling institutions, especially in key job-creating sectors. And four, incentivizing private sector investment to complement public investment. And five, enhancing social investment programs to promote social inclusion and deepen their impact on the most vulnerable Nigerians. So it is fair to say, based on the, the evidence of all of these, statements, that, it may be hard to fault government on intent. However, and I'm talking about, government's intent to uphold, the subsistence rights of citizens. The fact, however, that the results have largely fallen far short of these statements of intent. And that's the honest assessment. I mean, with poverty rate of 40%, which means over 80 million people living below the poverty line, with an unemployment rate of 33%, and more specifically, youth unemployment closer to 50%, with a high, misery index, which, the misery index, measures the degree of economic distress felt by everyday people, with the misery index of 51%, with a high Gini coefficient ratio of about 0.4, which reflects, significant, inequality in income distribution. Usually Gini coefficients of 0.4 and above are usually associated with political instability and growing social tensions. And so some of the explanation for the instability and the tensions we have can be found in this, the income inequality. While the economy is to grow, apart from over the last 5 years, we've been in recession twice, but thankfully they were short-lived recessions. But the fact remains that our average population growth for the last decade has been below the population growth rate. And so, clearly that's a contributing factor to the rising poverty, for as long as the GDP growth rate lags behind population growth rate, it will not feel like there's growth. So we need significantly higher growth rates. Having said that, we have had periods, in the recent past of high, growth rate, and yet poverty growing side by side with that because, again, of the questions about inclusiveness of the growth. And so one would then wonder, despite the intent as earlier on articulated and adequate resource endowment in Nigeria, why have the results turned out this woeful? I think that some of the key contributory factors are, first, a lack of a clear and shared vision to develop an inclusively prosperous nation. It's not clear that that vision has been clearly articulated and that it is, shared by all who should. I think that we've also been hit by the resource curse, what some call the Dutch disease. When we discovered oil, it simply upset the apple cart of this economy, and basically we just abandoned what what sensible economies do, and just agriculture that used to be the key. I think one of the earlier speakers, I think it was Professor Kapowski, I think, if I recall correctly, who made the point that there was a time in the past when Nigeria was a major exporter of agricultural products, but today we've become a net importer of food. And then we have the problem of weak public institutions and incompetent public officials. And I often put this ahead of corruption, which, of course, corruption and profligacy have also been contributory factor. But in my own experience, and when I say this, people don't believe that, I believe that in my own experience, incompetence has cost us more than corruption. We have an overly expensive democratic governance structure with 36 states, each with 36 states, a federal capital territory, 774 local governments, with elected officials. A bicameral, national legislature with, really, these august democratic, and the way that I illustrate this often is to say, look, the entire United States, the entire United States, has barely, at the federal, level, about 560, I think, legislators. We have 469 for Nigeria, that, with the GDP less than, most of the states in the US. It's just not a sustainable structure in my own view, but that's, what we have, and it's proving very sticky to try to change, that. And then, there's the erosion of, the moral fabric of society, which has manifested in unconscionable greed and ostentatious consumption, where people who the privileged simply, live like, oil oligarchs, whereas we're not. Over time, we were sold a lie that we were an oil-rich economy, which we are not. The typical oil-rich economies like Saudi Arabia, a population of just over 30 million, they pump 10 million barrels of crude per day. We are over 200 million, and we do under 2 million barrels a day. We're not like your typical oil-rich economy, but that's the lie we were sold, and so we try to live like economies that we are not. And so all of these have contributed to bringing us to the place where we are. The solutions lie in the causes. We have to undo, the causes. We have to, basically, envision what kind of country that we have to think, beyond just saying we want inclusive growth. We've got to envision a country where, that is prosperous and inclusively so. We've got to basically move from talk to actually doing something about, diversifying our economy and rebuilding, especially the manufacturing base of, this, economy, which will also, create the needed jobs. We've got to, focus on our human capital. There was a time when we boosted an excellent, educational system, at least, in most parts of the, of the country, and our tertiary institutions were very highly regarded. We need to look at that. We need to, design an education system that fit for purpose, that meets the need of. Yes. All right. Just a minute. I'll round up. And then, we need, in my opinion, we need to revisit our constitution and look at things like the governance structure that we have chosen for ourselves and see how this thing, and figure out how to build, our institutions and, and strong public institutions that can serve as a bulwark against some of these, causes of the challenging situation that we currently find ourselves. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ben Akabueze. We will open the floor for questions. We'll take the first 3 or 4 as the case may be. If you're on Zoom, you can use the Zoom facility to raise your hand or type your question in the chat box. We'll take the first 3 or 4 questions. If you are particular about the panelists you're raising your question to, you can let me know. If your question, I will redirect it. Question, please. Raise your hands and take the microphone. Would you want to go to the left? And we'll take the questions together at the left, and the young man in white, and Father Anthony. And I have a hand raised.
We also have a question on Zoom as well.
Okay, all right. I can see that. I can see the hand on Zoom. Please go ahead. Frame your question within 1 minute so that we can cover more grounds.
All right, thank you. My Lord, Bishop, panelists, and my fellow invitees and guests. My name is Ono Chapita. Yesterday, I was a bit confused, but today I think I know what to really say. All right. And what I have to say is with respect to understanding what development is, and eventually, I think giving one or two contributions to how I think we can implement whatever we've heard or learned for the past 4 days of this session. So I say that in order to practice development that takes in all aspects of the human person, you know, Professor Kapowski in his talk made mention of developing the human person. And of course, if you remember, according to Pope Paul VI, he said that development must help people to seek to do more, know more, and have more in order to be more. Going by this, I want to ask, thank God that my Lord Bishop is here. The question is, can the church have a role to play? Can the church intervene? Can the church lead this development at the smallest unit of the society? That's number one. Because I believe that the problem of the country has been identified and it is divided into two. We have the local and the global. The global, according to the new liberalist, they could not solve it. So we have to leave the global for the government to solve. Why we take the local? So, my Lord Bishop, sir, that's number one. Number two is the church allowed to own properties? If the answer is yes, how can the church use these properties to develop society? Thank you very much.
All right. If you have any concern for the bishop will respond after the panel discussion. So don't worry. Yes. Please try to frame your question within 1 minute to cover more grounds, please.
My name is Ojo Paul, staying on the existing protocol. My question will go to Dr. Ben Akabweze. In his delivering of his talk, he made mention of the fact that the kind of moral value of a nation is exhibited and is shown in the kind of budget that they have. I would like to throw this question, which says that what kind of moral value does Nigerian budget exhibit? If we are in the era of earth tourism, and our education sector is dying every day, and we have a country that we are talking about moral value that is which exhibit the kind of human dignity that shows that this is a human being. We are not longer talking about the social teaching of the Catholic Church. It's not talking about people living below $2 per day. It goes beyond that. Going by the elections that we have within the last 3 days, it shows that for you to be a complete human being, potable water, good housing, good job, education, power, security, health, all these things are lacking in our country. And in all fairness, What we are having is a systemic problem. Our leaders have failed us. It's obvious. If we have issues of bad leaders, if we have a good leader, we will have a good follower. Now, we come to the fact, within the last 3 days, we have been identifying the problem. But truth be told, if you are going to follow to the latter, the encyclical, the truth is the truth there is that we are going to end up having a revolution. If you are going to follow it to the latter, we are going to end up having a revolution. Now, yesterday I made mention of something like a mental revolution. Now, let's move from this level of, we already identify what the problems are, but what can we do? What are the practicable actions that we can take, the step that we can take? Yesterday, Professor Reverend Father Akinwale said something. We can't breathe. We can't talk.
Can you please?
Yes, let me summarize now. We can't talk. So what are the practicable actions that as an individual, as a community, that we can take, that will lift us out of this problem that we find ourselves? Thank you.
Thank you. Father Anthony, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Father Anthony. I'm still from Ododeidari. I'm happy to see all of you. Today is a little bit better than yesterday, and we pray to continue to be better. Since Monday, we have been learning, and I don't know what I've learned so far is so much. But I am wondering, after today, Gongo, what's next? Yes, we have had very brilliant and educating speakers. They have taught us so much. After today, will our action be personal or communal? When I say communal, I mean as a church, or are we going, or as individuals? I get to my diary, I put it to work. Somebody said somewhere, every human being in Nigeria is a local government, not local government chairman. Every person is a local government because each one of us, we have taken over the functions of the government. You buy your land, you build your house, you put security, you put water, put everything. The government comes to take tax and tell you your house is in the wrong place, and so on and so forth. We were in Nigeria, we are in Ondo State right now, where the government contributes nothing to you starting a business. But as soon as the business takes off, they come to take tax. They don't provide road, they don't provide anything, but they are there to collect the money, revenue. So when do we get off this greedy log where we are? Thank you for tolerating me.
Thank you. I will take one more question on Zoom. Then the second session, I'm going to start with you, Ma. On Zoom, I'm going to have Mr. Tony Prof. Please raise your question or your concern within 1 minute, please, so that we'll turn it over to the panelists.
Thank you very much, Father, your Lord Bishop, and all protocol duly observed. I'm happy with the position made by, oh my God. Oh, I'm audible.
We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me?
Your microphone, I guess your microphone.
You need to raise the volume of your mic.
We can't hear you.
Looks like you're muted now.
Okay, well, maybe we'll let you take care of your microphone, then we'll come back to you. So I will turn it over to the panelists. And the question on the church, before the bishop responds, when it is time for comments, can be attended to by the professor of theology here. I think other questions were more directed. One to the Director General of the Budget, and the other to Professor Pablo Tomi. So, Professor Casarella, would you want me to remind you of the question?
I will appreciate your reminding me of the one to me because I didn't hear it.
Okay, I'll remind you, Professor Pat. Professor Casarella, would you want me to remind you of the question?
Sure.
So there is a concern about the church as developing, even though he said the church owning a property. But what it means is that is there a theological ground for the church to be the developer of the community?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't speak to the problem in the diocese there. That's not my responsibility or area of expertise. But on the general question, I mean, I think, for example, of the early meetings of the Latin American Bishops' Conference in Medellin in 1968, where they had to address the question of poverty, they realized that the first question was not just whether or not to give charity to the poor, but the first question was examining their own property and to be a church of the poor. And John the 23rd actually spoke to that. So but I guess the more fundamental point is that the church has a duty in light of Catholic social teaching from Rerum Novarum up to Fratelli Tutti to exercise moral leadership and to expound these principles that we've been talking about, the personalist principle of that Paul VI elaborated upon, that we have to look to the whole, to each human being and to the whole human being. And as that has been developed up to the pontificate of Pope Francis, to listen to the economy of the people and the rights to land, labor, and lodgings as expounded by intermediary institutions, not just local individuals or global actors, but intermediary institutions that are defending these rights. So that would be my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Benakabueze, on the budget and what value has it brought to the Nigerian people?
Thank you. I think the question, as I understood it, was, I mean, what kind of value does the Nigerian budget reflect? Which was flowing from my comment that a country's budget, you can tell, you know, what it values by looking at its budget. The truth is, when you look at Nigeria's budget, where are the, you know, the key areas in which spending is going? It's in this order. You take infrastructure, public infrastructure, roads, and so on, and that's followed by defense and security. And then, you know, it's followed by education, then health, then agriculture. So on the strength just of, you know, how resources are allocated in which sectors, you can argue that it reflects a concern for, the human being, for the citizens. The reality, however, is that Nigeria's budget is way too small. The public expenditure, the aggregate public expenditure is way too small. Nigeria has a public expenditure ratio of 12% of GDP. And I'm talking about when you aggregate what all of the tiers of government, federal, states, and local governments collectively are spending. If you take the federal government's budget, is barely over $30 billion, $35 billion for a population of 200 plus million people. That's the size of budgets of big universities in the US. So again, it goes down to the fact that we don't have enough resources. The corollary of that is that we also have the lowest tax to GDP ratio in the world. The public revenues are low, and it limits the capacity of government to actually spend. And then this is compounded by challenges in terms of quality of spending. So one, you don't have enough to spend, And two, there are challenges in the quality of spending based on some of the factors I alluded to earlier, the institutions, the weakness in the institutions and corruption. And that's why, it just looks like, because the impact is not there, it looks like, there is no intent to do good. So that would be my, my comment on that. So the only way we can, first, we've got to grow, the size of the budget. To do so, we've got to grow revenues, because even the inadequate budget size currently today is with a large amount of borrowing, of debt, which we can't continue. We can't sustain debt at borrowing at current levels. So it might entail some short-term pain as government seeks to, to show up more resources, which takes me to Father Anthony's question. The government provides nothing but wants to collect taxes. I hear this kind of comment, very often, but, I recall once in Lagos State, Lagos, work for Lagos State, LASMA does nothing, they don't do anything. And government said, okay, no problem, we withdraw the LASMA folks from the roads for a few days. And everybody was begging for LASMA to come back. And yet, when they were there, you take them for granted. The government does nothing. Even just having the LASMA, those LASMA guys get paid to create some order. And, oftentimes it's understandable if the road to your house, your street hasn't been built, as far as you're concerned, government is doing nothing in building roads. But there are other roads that you use in the course of, going about your daily. So it's really not true to say government is doing nothing, provides nothing. Let's try, withdrawing the police. We saw it during the NSAS riot, when the policemen and whatever all fled the streets and whatever. We saw the surge in insecurity. So it's fair to say government is not doing enough, but to say government is doing nothing is not, is not correct. Olamide Falana posted a question in the chat box addressed to me. Say, how do we move our youth from talk to innovative actions? Well, I think platforms like this help, basically, providing mentorship and, basically, just encouraging them to act. And there's a lot of talk. Talk is cheap, but we've got to encourage the youth to action and support them and, and capacitate them to take necessary action and not just talk.
Mr. Ben, can you hear me now?
Yes. Were you not hearing me? Were you hearing me?
Yes, I can. I wanted to take that as a second round, but that's fine. So let me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I picked it up on the chat box and.
Yes.
All right.
Yes, that. Professor Pat. So the question is about mindset and values. In summary, the question is about how do you begin to frame the mindset towards values, considering that some of the problems which you highlighted is the problem of mindset. So how do you begin to frame mindset? And that is exactly what you do too.
Okay, well, thank you. Interestingly, I'm going to borrow from the U.S. experience here. A great U.S. senator who used to be a professor at Harvard, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who liked to identify the difference between, I guess, Democrats and Republicans, more or less liberals and conservatives, with what came to be known as the two truths, which says that the central conservative truth is that it is not politics but culture that is responsible for the progress of a society. The central liberal truth is that politics can change a culture and save it from itself. The fundamental truth is that until we get to the point that culture, our values, is central to how we make progress, we're going to be struggling with the whole question. It is how we reinforce values from get-go. And take a very simple point here. The economy is based on trust, the expectation that you will act as you have said. If you have a culture in which people are not trustworthy, you are going to underperform those who live in a more trustworthy culture for a variety of reasons. First of all, when people don't trust that you will do what you say, they will probably avoid transaction with you because they don't want a negative consequence from that transaction. Now, if they see some value to be had from transaction, but cannot trust you, then they will look for ways to hedge their risk. That effort at hedging the risk creates transaction costs. And transaction costs mean that you're not going to be as competitive as the people who don't have that value challenge. A simple illustration from part of our history. There was a time when, because of central banks' inability to pay as and when due on confirmed letters of credit, Nigerian banks were denied confirmation of lines of credit from their foreign partners. Now, the uncertainty reached the point where even subsidiaries of multinationals, like a sort of parts to ship to their subsidiary until there's a confirmed letter of credit sitting on their table. Now, what it meant was that from order to production in Nigeria, sometimes it was 1 year cycle, whereas that could be done in 3 months in Ghana. And this is a high transaction cost that makes you less competitive. And so values are so important. If we treat values at the level of, oh, here's a nice thing that is moral, that people won't understand until you show the link of values to the bottom line, to the basic quality of life that we all live. And then people get this. And this is really what institutions are. The institutions essentially become codified values. I guess the old institutional economic school like to define institutions as a settled habit of a community. So that settled habit means that a typical person from that community will behave in a particular way, not because he was created to be different from a person from the other community, but because fear of consequence and all kinds of things over a period of time led to that thing becoming a norm. And so that country, that community is a more effective player. I think that this should start from the home. And then this is where the point of Moynihan about how conservatives see the world. Family values is a conservative position. But family values mean that as Pope John Paul II writes in Labour Exercens, the parents are the first teachers of their children. And that domestic school is where you learn the values of integrity, thrift, and all those kinds of things that ultimately help economies to prosper and ultimately leads to a higher quality of life for all. Part of why I founded the Center for Values in Leadership is to try and work with young professionals to recognize this. Because there are a lot of people who have power and equate power to leadership, and they're not the same thing. Because leadership operates on influence based on expectation, whereas power comes from authority, and people the best definition of power that I like to use in that regard goes to Robert Dahl, 1956. Power is the ability of A to make B do what B would not ordinarily want to do. Whereas the case of influence, the person is motivated to do because, they see a sense of service in the person asking them to do. They see knowledge in that person who's asking them to do. So they act right. And collectively, that leads to a greater good of all. The common good is advanced in that context. So I'm hoping that the domestic church, all the agents of socialization, the church, and all of those will be instruments in creating this set of values that will enable society to make more progress. I hope that spoke to the question.
I hope so too. Thank you, Professor. We have the aid of the governor on Zoom with us. Ms. Bumi, can you change your name? Can you use your real name as a Zoom name so that when it's time, we'll call you for your few minutes intervention. So we'll go to the round 2 of the questions. Please, like I advised, let's frame the question within 1 minute. And if the panelists can also respond also quickly, then so that we can cover more ground for the second round. We're running out of time. So I'm going to take you, Tony Prof, then take Father Joseph Ogodo before I come to Ms. Olofela.
Thank you, Father. I hope I'm audible enough now.
We can manage.
Okay. I'm just trying to make reference to the statement of Professor Patutomi, and I'm glad he gave us what we can call the economic chronicle of Nigeria. It is now crystal clear that at a time like this, when there are so many agitation for restructuring in Nigeria, we can actually advocate more for that regionalism at a time when there was a sort of positive economic competition among various regions in the north and the south and the west. When this is done in such a way that the central government is weaker and there is more power concentrated within the region, then that resource control that has always been issue of debate would have put to rest. And through that, we will have more development coming up from the region. This we engage and absorb the crowded labor market already, because we have teeming youth out there that are doing nothing. And with that, when these youth are taken out of the labor market, definitely we are addressing insecurity as we have it. When we are addressing insecurity and development is taking place at each region, it will create a sense of belonging. And in African psychology, when people participate in decision-making in governance, that is already an entry point of conferring dignity. And at the end, the principle of solidarity that many are talking about can easily be gotten. And through that, people can now speak together in one voice to the principle of subsidiarity, whereby whatever the people at the local or the state cannot develop, the government can come in. And lastly, I will just conclude that at a time like this, I will still support that theory of comparative advantage. What are those things that are available in a particular region? Can the people actually come together again and ensure that there is mass production of all these resources? Because whether we like it or not, the human development is not just about material. The people need to be mentally developed. And that is why for everyone that has been talking about what next after this symposium, I advocate strongly that a symposium like this should become a diocesan event.
All right, Tony, thank you so much. Thank you for your comment. Father Joseph, can you quickly frame your question or your comment? We can't hear you if you're talking, you're muted.
I hope everyone can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay, I can hear you. I couldn't hear the last question.
Okay. It's more of comments and partly comment, partly questions, knowing fully that the principles of the social teachings of the church cannot be the beauty of the principles of the social teachings of the church comes out when it is not treated in isolation. And my question is, how can we make sure that those who are going into public offices, especially politicians, how can we make these principles? How can we make them understand these principles and the workings in such a way that it will help both the politicians themselves, those going to public offices, and help the populace? This is my own contribution and question.
Thank you, Father. I will direct the question when we return to the panelists. Mr.
All right.
Okola, please. Can you raise your question before I return to the Zoom?
Thank you very much. For Professor Pat to me, who said that when there's increase in our economy, that is the oil revenue, 30% should be set aside for presidential account of what. Another percentage should be kept for our sovereign wealth, to be saved. But what we hear these days is dwindling revenue. The states are not able to pay salaries because of dwindling revenue. The federal government goes are borrowing billions of dollars all the time. When will the government be sincere with us and let us know the real state of the economy? When will they cut off all these excesses that you said in governance? A situation where the senator takes home a lot of money, millions of money, and apart from that has as many aides as possible. All these are the things draining our economy. And the poor people here are so even scared to go to their farms to add to their own economic base. They have farms, the farms are destroyed by herdsmen. They are even afraid to go because they don't know whether they go to the farms, they come back alive. So when will government help us to address all these issues and be sincere with the economy and save that at least we are the commoners, at least we shall be able to have at least, even if our salary, we have a salary, not being told every month that there's dwindling in the economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ma. I will quickly return to the Zoom before attending to the hands raised. Father Benedict Fadoju, can you quickly frame your question?
I believe so much in the principle.
We can't hear you.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you can hear you.
Good. So I believe so much in the principle of subsidiarity. In this, it means that the lower government or level of government should be able to handle situations in which the higher level of government does not interfere. In other words, everyone at his own stage of government operates without the interference of the higher stage. But the problem with that in Nigeria, it seems that's a mirage. I don't think that's going to happen. This, what I have now, is more of a suggestion. JDPC houses of Ondo and in the nation, I think you now have some extra work to do. So much to do in parishes, outstation churches, getting more people organized and to see how you can actually be more of value to the people. But also I have a question for the Education Commission of our own diocese. Is it possible that the Constitution of Nigeria, vis-a-vis the social teachings of the church, forms a curriculum for all our children in Catholic schools in which they will be able, by all means, to criticize the Constitution and to know what is right and good for their country? Secondly, I would like any of the Nigerian panelists to please give an answer to this. can you vividly tell us what the local governments are doing in Nigeria at the moment? Because it's very obvious that state governments have taken over the roles of local governments. And in most cases, the grassroots is destroyed. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Benedict. So I will return to the panelists quickly. Professor Kapowski, can you quickly, if you have any information about the salaries of US members of Congress, do you have any information on that? Then secondly, since you work with the US bishops, do you have any information about how the proposed Catholic social station has an influence on Catholic public officers, for example? You can answer those
how the church influences? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so the salaries of congressmen in the United States, the official salaries are quite low. On the other hand, the representatives in the Congress are disproportionately wealthy. So there's, that's partly related. I wouldn't say the salaries are low, but for leaders of society, the salaries are low. People can always do much better financially by being in the private sector than they can in the public sector. That leads really a public life to be something disproportionately for the rich, which is unfortunate. I know in Nigeria, you have kind of the opposite problem, which is that public officials are paid relatively well. And so trying to get into public sector is a huge benefit. And maybe it drains talent away from the private sector and leads to too much rent seeking. In terms of the USCCB, which is the lobbying, has the lobbying function of the Catholic Church in the United States. It's an active lobbying group. The church is quite divided politically in the United States. I would say, half Republican and half Democrat. And to be frank, I think they pay lip service to the things that the church values when it supports their political views. And when it does it, unfortunately, the church gets ignored.
All right, thank you. Mr. Benakabo, there's a question on the real state of the economy. The real state of the economy. Can you briefly make a statement on that, please?
Well, I mean, I don't think that anyone is in doubt, and certainly I've spoken on several fora. The economy is, very, seriously, challenged. And if you look at, all of the key, indices, that much is, obvious. The economy has been in recession twice in the last 5 years, driven, in each case, the factor that has precipitated it has been, mass decline in oil prices, first in 2015, and then with onset of COVID-19. But the reality is that it's a reflection of, a systemic, weakness, in the economy. There's a complete absence of fiscal buffers. In 2008, 2009, we had a similar dip in oil prices, but because we had fiscal buffers, then we had savings, it was easy to weather the storm, but now we don't. Unfortunately, rebuilding those fiscal buffers in the face of the current challenge is difficult. So the economy is the challenge. As I said, government isn't generating enough revenues. I know it's not a popular subject, which is why I said for this thing to get better, it may get worse. But if we just want to, be applying some ointment on a deep sore and whatever, and soothing ourselves, we may never, we may never heal. And so, for instance, we have no business, today, spending over ₦1 trillion to subsidize petrol price. It's actually hurting the economy the more. It's destroying the economy in the long term. It's denying the economy of needed investment. And guess what? It is the rich who are actually, taking at least 85% of the benefit of that, not the, not the masses. So we've got to deal with those kinds of, things. So, you asked a question about the state of the economy. The economy is in bad state.
Right. So I'm going to return to you, and your answer should be brief. But let me go to Professor Patutomi. You've talked about elite capture, and there's a concern about the salaries of the Nigerian members of House of Senate and House of Representatives. I wanted to say Congress. So, briefly, is that a problem to the Nigerian economy? Professor Patutomi, please.
Okay. The truth of the matter is that economics is about incentives. And if people who produce as little as lawmakers take as much away, the incentive is for everybody of any talent to want to get there and to leave the more productive parts of the economy. So that is a problem one. The second part of it, which is more troubling, is that because of the way it is, people do just about everything to get there. And so electoral process is broken completely because the biggest criminals in town put their talent to work to be able to be part of that elite that can extract rent besides what they are paid, that can blackmail ministers and co and get some more out of them. So it creates a very dysfunctional system. But I think that, the point, one of the questions raised about how people are socialized, what can the church do and all of that is so important, because there are also in those chambers some decent people, some come up with. Of course, it's easy to always see the bad guys, but there are there some people who don't do some of the things that we think everybody in those houses do. Pope John Paul II, on the Feast of Christ the King, before he passed, wrote a doctrinal note to the Congregation on the Propagation of the Doctrine of the Faith about in politics, lay people in life, erecting St. Thomas More as a patron saint of. Now, I think that it is our duty, all of us, in different ways, to play a role in socializing people from the very base, just like you went into the Boy Scouts in those days. I think that parish priests should be able to organize activities, clubs, in which this social doctrine of the church is a basic instrument for socializing young people and encouraging them to participate in public life. Because if they don't participate, the kinds of people who make the decisions on their behalf may be those who will act against their faith. And so they have a duty, an obligation to participate in. But they have to have the kind of character that it takes to participate in spite of the pressures to advance the common good of all.
Right.
So all of us have a role. Parish priest. There is a Catholic Action that has begun to get very active recently in Nigeria. And the idea is also to raise that same tempo in socializing people, in preparing them for public life. It's something that we should really take very seriously.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you.
I will take the last round of questions. After that question, I will turn it over to Mrs. Bumia Ademosu, representing the governor of Ondo State. She's on Zoom. And after our intervention, I will give the panelists their last comments before I hand it over to the bishops. I have the bishops' questions here, so I will mention it when it is time. So last round of questions. Father Valentine Omolaki on Zoom. You have your 1 minute.
Okay. I want to thank Professor Patitomi because he's been the director of the Center for Development, Value for Development. One of the major problems that we're having in all this our conversation is that it's like our country, Nigeria, since independence, it's like we don't have a focus, a philosophy that guides our economy, our politics, our social life, our cultural life. It's like we don't have a particular thing we can pinpoint. For example, in America, you have patriotism. And that was why when there was a president of recent who was behaving in a strange manner, the American society that keys into patriotism expunged him. In European country, we talk about industrialization and tourism. Look at all the premiership. You see what the premiership is bringing to the economy. You see their universities, what is bringing to the economy. The industrialization, Volvo, Mercedes, and so on and so forth. This is characterized of European countries. You also see in Japan, Asian countries, China, technology is their philosophy of education. When you look at Israel, their philosophy of education, as small as they are, it's security. Even the Catholic education we're talking about, we are not bothered about technology, but we use technological invention. But very primary to Catholic education is character and human formation. This is our philosophy of education. And coming to this Catholic education, it is hinged on 5 major cardinal points. Number 1, it is inspired by supernatural vision. Number 2, it is founded on Christian anthropology. Number 3, it is animated by communion and community. Number 4, it is imbued with Catholic worldviews. And number 5, it is sustained by teaching testimony. This is what is about Catholic education. But you see, in Nigeria, since independence till now, 60 years, what is our philosophy of education? This is what is making all the curriculum we have been designing to build our economy, to build our politics, to build everything around us in Nigeria, to keep somersaulting. A government comes in, kicks off everything that the previous government has done. Take, for example, during Professor Patitomi's time and Mr. Ben Akubweze, when you were in secondary school, you were used to Christian Bible knowledge. But my generation, we got to know about Christian religious knowledge. But what they are doing now is Christian religious studies. And there are mutilations in all this. Even there was a time Nigerian government attempted to merge Christian religious studies and Islamic religious studies. So you see there is a confusion. And when I see people like Professor Patitomi, Femi Falana, Michael Ozekume, they have been fighting to save the soul of Nigeria for the past 40 years. They are tired now. I pity them a lot. And in my own generation, I feel so frustrated, disappointed. And for the generation coming before us, it is more of a despondency. I've almost resigned, even as a priest, and with due acknowledgement of my bishop, that it's like Valentine, you are not going to see the goodness of Nigeria. It's not a cause. It's not a cause. The situation is too bad. It's too tense. The other time, Professor Ben Akabweze, you were responding to Father Debussy. Father Debussy was being emphatic. We provide generator for ourselves today. We generate power for ourselves. We provide road for ourselves, water ourselves, security ourselves, everything ourselves. I think this President Buhari government has even done more things, more painful, because they can convince us on corruption, fighting it to the standstill, security, and economy. But look at what we are experiencing today. So I want to point to Professor Ben Akabweze. With due respect to you, sir, you have been in government Since 2005, you were in Lagos State and now you are in federal government. What do you think is going to be the legacy of this president, of this government? Number two, can we now call, sorry, Father, I've taken too much of your time. I'm rounding off now. Okay, I read off now. Can we call the think tank? We have Christopher Kolade, the former British ambassador. We have Professor Mabogunje. We have Shehu Musa. We can gather them. The president of WTO is a Nigerian. The owner of Gatwick International Airport in London, United Kingdom, he's a Nigerian. Can we gather these people with Professor Patutomi and others like you? Can we gather these people and design a philosophy that will guide Nigeria? For example, I propose to you and to this platform, can we have community value or community cohesion? This is the value that Professor Patutomi has been promoting, and this is what the bishops are calling our attention to. We can't breathe, and the bishops are saying, recovering the soul of Nigeria. How do we do it? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Father. We have 2 more questions to go, please. We will not be able to take more. We've gone past our time. Yes, Ma, and your question, please frame within 1 minute, I beg.
Thank you, Father. Everybody. Good afternoon once again. My question is this. I know we have inadequate budget, but yet there are leakages. It's of our government to really be accountable to us. If we have small, and there are leakages, that's the problem. The other one is, how do we identify with this issue of insecurity? It's still got down to governments. Let them wake up. Let them do something to save us so that this thing. We need them do something. But at the end, we can develop and we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. That last question, we have a young man there. Thank you, sir.
My Lord Bishop, everybody here present, good afternoon to you all. My question is, the budget is small compared to the population strength, no doubt. But in the midst of this budget deficit, the larger portion of the budget goes into the pockets of our politicians. Then the question is, what measure is the government putting in place to checkmate our politicians, to make them do, or to ensure that they use the little funds available for the main job? Thank you.
I'll remind you of your question, Mr. Benakabo. It's like you have most of it for the last round. Yes, yes, madam, and that'll be it. There is madam in black. Yes.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Just 1 minute, please.
Yes, I won't take much of your time. My own is essentially bordering on budget and being a community. Well, I think I should start from introduction. I am a Maureen Ojelo, a community specialist that works with our local communities as an NGO person for some time after graduation. Please, I have listened to most of the contributions so far from the beginning of this program to now, and I discovered that what most of the presenters today have spoken about are all on history and classical economic theories and perspectives as regards human development. But the church perspective is obviously, again, not in line with what the presenters, the likes of Patutomi, Benakabeze. I am not here to criticize them really, but to say that their views have failed. Most of the theory so far has not on economic development has not worked in Nigeria. And these views that they are presenting here is like rhetorics that is not in tandem with the current realities of the day of the common man in Nigeria. Because he who wears the shoe knows where it pinches. The likes of Benakabeze, with due respect, of course, is on the upper echelon of society, and being a senior government official, he does not really appreciate, from his presentation so far, he does not really seem to appreciate what the common realities is on ground. And he does not seem to be even very yes on the realities that the common man is facing as a whole. So my take here is that regarding the person who said that the budget of the country is low in comparison to the advanced economies of the world, I want to say that first and foremost, the National Assembly, what they take is something that should concern them there at the upper echelon, that they should find a way to cut that. Nigerians has been advocating and calling for the budget of National Assembly, that it is far, far too high in comparison to what Nigeria is other Nigerians supposed to. And then the budget for social sector. That's where I want to address. Please, few minutes, moderator.
No,
the budget for social sector should be increased. This is what I want to say. The budget, because without that, social sectors cannot perform what they are supposed to perform. Most of the programs that are to elevate poverty cannot carry on without increased budgeting for the social sector. And the corruption should be addressed. Corruption should really be supported and addressed frontally. Thank you.
All right, ma'am. Thank you so much. So this is the way we will have this part of the session. Panelists, you will respond to the questions as part of your final comments. So, and I've noted some of the questions, and I think Mr. Benakabo said you have most of them. So right now, I will shift the ground to Ms. Bumi Ademosu, representing Ondo State government, to have the governor's intervention for 4 minutes. And while you are making your intervention, I'm not sure if you were here when the question of tax was raised. So the question was about people making their own various provisions as regards their social lives and government extracting tax from what the government has not provided. So there was a comment as regards that. So while you are making your intervention on behalf of the Ondo State government, if you can briefly respond to that. You have 4 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you, Father Lokumboro. Good afternoon, everyone. Standing on the...
2 minutes.
2 minutes, I will just brush over what we've done. The first thing we realized is that we can't continue to live on oil. So what's the first thing we did? We went on our agriculture. What are the basic things we can do on this agriculture? The 18 local government, we bought a new set of tractors to navigate the roads. The moment our farmers have opportunity of bringing things to the urban city, it relieves them of a lot of problems. Cash crop seedlings, we are distributed to them. On these cash crop seedlings distributed to them, it was given free of charge. So it to enable them boost whatever their productivity is all about. On the cocoa seedling, we gave them about 2.5 million cocoa seedlings. It's not given to all because we have them in clusters. We've distributed them into cooperatives. These are part of the things we did, because for them to be able to access any of the intervention, we need to be able to have them in clusters, which we did. The first thing we did, we rearranging them. Then what did we do? We had a 2,000 hectares of cocoa plantation established for the 500 young youths. And these youths, we are giving 4 hectares each to enable them farm. Then we have what we call the youth on the ridges. 5,000 of our graduates were trained on this agricultural chain thing. Then under our youth, we were able to create 15,000 jobs for our youths at our own depot. We have a place called Industrial Park, somewhere along Omoto Shore. When you get to that industrial park, it's a private business partnership. We had it with these Chinese people. They came in. The MBF is being done there. We have what we call the trading. Take a drive down to the place as an Ondo State citizen. If you want to go and you want me to pilot you with security and everything, honestly, be free to come to that office. We will take you around to see what we do. Let's come together to think together and see how we can do. In that lane, we've been able to do our development on the deep sea port. Right now, we've met all the criteria by the federal government. We are waiting for the federal government approval. And to date, I can tell you that well over 1.2 billion has been invested by the Ondo State government. The moment we have that place open, we have the deepest seaports in the country. The moment we have that, we will decongest Lagos. And when we decongest Lagos, we have Benin, we have Port Harcourt, we have so many, we are in the central to be able to move and work activity very well. And I can tell you that has even encouraged more investors to come in. And with these investors, we've been able to think of so many things. Then what we have your park that we developed where over 1,000 hectares of land at that Odibo area. We've been able to partner with Emisank Industry Limited. The cost of the investment is 10.8 billion naira, and it's ongoing. We have the establishment of the cocoa starch, cocoa dry beans, and the tomato paste project in partnership with Austrade Trade at Kajola Odigbo area. We've been able to do that one, and it's ongoing. And we have the establishment and engagement of 1,000 hectares of oil palm plantation at the Ondo State Agri-Business Center in Ore. So I can tell you, and for the first time, we have a place where we assemble vehicles in Ore. When you get to that place, we are assembling trucks. When you get in there, where we change our cassava, where we're trying to change it into ethanol. We have, I know, Reverend Father, let your people come to my office. I'll be glad to take them around. I'll be glad to show them what we've been able to do. We are diverting from what we call the oil state into what we call an agricultural state. And we are partnering with foreign partners. And I can tell you it's a safer place for you to do business. No kidnapping, nothing of that sort. Come in here, we're ready to partner with you. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Right now, I'm going to be in trouble with my professors at Notre Dame. I've exhausted. We're supposed to have ended like by 3 p.m. And so I will give the floor to Professor Kapowski to have his 1 minute, 30 seconds. And next will be Professor Casarella. Professor Casarella, while you are giving your final comment, would you be able to say something, if you remember the comments of Pope Pius XI on wages? If you can say something briefly on that, on congregational annual. So then also, Mr. Benakabweze, you will have 3 minutes, while others will have 1.5 minutes, since you have more questions to answer. Then after Professor Casarella, we will have Professor Pat Utomi. Professor Kapowski, if you are still here, you have your minutes.
Father, Professor Kapowski had to leave. He had another meeting, so we'll have to move on to Dr. Casarella.
All right, Dr. Casarella, please.
Thank you. No, I don't remember what Quadragesimo Anno says about wages, but in Let Us Dream, Pope Francis actually endorses a basic way, a universal minimum wage. So there's an ongoing discussion about how a just wage addresses the needs of a whole family and not just of the individual wage earner. That'll be interesting to look at. But I would just like to conclude with immense gratitude for letting me participate, but also recalling the words of Pope Francis in Evangelii Gaudium, in the Joy of the Gospel, that about unity and conflict. The reason that Catholic social teaching is an elixir in a certain sense. It doesn't lead to unanimity. It doesn't lead to the avoidance of conflict. In fact, Pope Francis tells us that unity is a gift from the church, and it's a gift towards which we put all of our hopes when we gather together, not because we're going to study Catholic social teaching and result in a unanimity of opinion, but because out of this diversity of opinions, and by facing the conflict rather than avoiding the conflict, we can move forward and have greater hope. And with that in mind, I really see the Church of Nigeria, and particularly in the Ondo State, as a great source of hope. And it was a real privilege to be able to participate in this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Professor Patutomi, you have 1.5 minutes, please. Professor Patutomi?
I was muted there. My apologies. My quick little remark about a few of the comments, one of which was a spirited defense of the Ondo State government official. Well, it is true. I don't think anybody ever says that government has done nothing, but it's what the possibilities are from what is being done. I think that the whole issue of the social programs, social sector programs, the education and healthcare sectors are so important. Education and healthcare, you will have people who are able to provide infrastructure. So that's, I don't agree with her the way she states the conversation as not understanding the state of the ordinary person. It's about ordinary person. You don't go around handing out cash to ordinary persons on the street. They won't make any progress. You will have to fish rather than teach them to fish rather than giving them fish. Having said that, there are times where you have to bridge. Now, the official was talking about, I can say, because the vice president has said that publicly several times now, that I introduced into the government's program a guy called what's his name again? Has written this book, The Fix, Jonathan Tepperman, and talks about how that program works. And I thought we should introduce it here. And so when the vice president and myself and some others got together to develop the roadmap for the country, I introduced that subject, and it became part of the social programs of this government. The bottom line in my contribution is that at the heart of how Nigeria can be transformed is the principle of subsidiarity. We must go back down to local governments as the heart of governing, and that those local governments not be seen as political establishments, literally speaking, but as economic development establishments. And that this whole concept that I talked about of latent comparative advantage, you take the local endowment and essentially develop limited industrial policy to support that, for growth of production at the local level, and at that level is how we can get more people out of poverty. And that is really what matters the most as far as I'm concerned today. And I hope that the work that the church does makes a huge difference there, because the original apostolates that the church was famous for, that helped bring us out of the economies of the last century that we're in, education and healthcare. And I thank you for the privilege of participating in this Very important conversation.
Thank you, Professor Paratomi. Mr. Ben Akabo.
Well, thank you. I think, I'm not going to try to answer each of the questions because, there just isn't enough time. So I'm going to try and the question about what will be the legacy of the Buhari's administration. First, I'll leave that to the people of Nigeria to determine. And, he has 2 more years, just under 2 years. So at that point, it will be this thing. But let me say this, and I say this with every sense of responsibility. I was Commissioner for Economic Planning and Budget in Lagos State, and I've been Director General of the Budget Office here in the last 2 years. With every sense of modesty, I have left each of these places better than I met them and contributed this thing. So I can take responsibility for the overall amounts of spend, even in areas that I am not accountable for. It's from the tone of this thing, it's Peter trying to even explain some of the things that have been done, right? Maureen Odelu, you said that I don't seem to appreciate the common man's realities. Nothing can be further from the truth than that. You forget that I'm not just a government official. I have a life outside of this. I pastor a church. So I deal with these, I see these realities, every day. I come from a community, whatever. So, but you see, the kind of comment you made, this is why public officials often lie, because people don't like to listen to the truth. People don't like to hear the hard truth. So, but I don't, and I wouldn't lie to you about the situation and what I think needs to be done. There's been a lot of talk about the National Assembly salaries, and I think I need to put this in context because Professor Kapowski said that public officials in Nigeria are well paid. I think Patutomi will tell you that that's not the truth. Public officials in Nigeria actually, only paid, and we've got to draw a line between what people roughly take and what they are paid. Okay, in the case of the National Assembly, and this is a constitution that we operate. The constitution had given them this thing there. The constitution says the Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Commission sets the salaries of public officers. That commission has set salaries for the National Assembly people. But in disregard to that, they have awarded themselves allowances. So it's really, earlier on, someone asked the question, what can the youth do beyond talking? We can sit back and complain and moan about this until people are ready to take action about what they don't like. Sitting in this isn't going to change anything. People have been bemoaning it, and people are taking but that's not reflective of that. 20 years ago, I was managing director and chief executive of a bank. My salary today is less than what I earned, what I was paid 20 years ago as director of a bank. So, some of us are in these jobs because we want to be able to contribute to building, not to take, a privilege, because I've known far better privilege than whatever privilege is, I currently get now in my working career. What can we do to get, someone said, politicians to use the limited resources for public good? We've got to do this thing. We've got to basically, stand up to the officials. The citizens themselves are a major part of the problem. And I say this with every sense of responsibility. I just told you 20 years ago, I was managing director of a bank. And I earned then even more than I earn today. And yet back then, I was hardly ever invited as chairman at fundraising ceremonies. I didn't get added to all kinds of whatever this thing. Today, because I'm a public official and Director General Budget Office, the people themselves put a lot of burden, a lot of pressure on public officials, and those who don't have the character to be able to withstand it simply buckle. Once you're appointed a public official, you get invited to every fundraising event, every whatever, and you're expected to contribute amounts far in excess of your, so, it doesn't work, if we want to really be able to hold our people. As for putting together think tanks, as Valentin Molakin said, I don't think the child problem is think tank. In the first term of President Buhari, we had the economic management team under the chairmanship of Mr. Vice President. I was part of that economic management team. A lot of people said, oh, the people in the economic management team don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're, let's bring all the eggheads, all the top economists in Nigeria to do it. So, the president, they disbanded the economic management team and considered the Presidential Economic Advisory Council, comprising some of Nigeria's best economists, chaired by Professor Salami, Bismarck, Rewane, those people there. You be the judge as to what has changed. Ultimately, I'm a believer that structure is good, and we need a good structure. There's a talk about returning to regional, governance structure, and I'm one of those who believes so, and I've advocated that. But I'd like to sound a caution that if we return to those cautions and we do not change our leadership recruitment methods, and we end up with the same sort of people in positions as we currently have, I'm afraid that the structural solution will become a mirage. Ultimately, it's people. So we've got to, in our leadership recruitment, method, the people have got to, get involved. The churches and the churches have a key role to play to specialize people. And I don't think it's no longer time for the church to stay aloof and say and try to create a distance. The church has to be frontal in guiding the people in making the right, choices when it's election time and whatever, because, it's clear that people left to themselves haven't made the right choices. When people in pursuit of universal suffrage, if somebody can sell a vote and collect 500 naira and vote, you raise these questions as to whether that person deserves the vote in the first place. But people need to be helped, even to help themselves. And so if all that we do at election time is sell our votes, the people who buy the votes, when they get into power, believe that it's a transaction that has occurred and they've paid for the privilege to go and pillage, our resources. So I'll leave it there because, of time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I will hand over the microphone to the bishop, and after the bishop's brief comment, Ether, you will conclude. Once again, Ether, welcome to Nigeria. I warned you.
You did warn me, yes.
Well, let me begin by thanking everyone who has spoken, especially the panelists and others who have contributed in one way or the other to this discussion. Well, Nigeria problem, as somebody said earlier, is systemic. And I can describe the situation at this moment as a situation of failed leadership. The leadership at all levels seem to have failed. Leadership really is not about power, because people go to leadership in Nigeria to seek power. I think leadership is more of a purpose. The purpose. Why are you in that place as a leader? Why are you chosen to be a leader? What do you seek in leadership? What is the purpose of Nigeria? Somebody talked about the philosophy that will guide our country. So, without any philosophy that can be adopted by all citizens and work towards a common purpose and shared vision, it becomes very problematic, and the problem is what is in our hands today. You see, for the first time, I don't know, I can be corrected, please. For the first time in the history of many years in Nigeria, we heard that oil was not the highest means of revenue to government, to the country this past year, or rather this time. It has become the external remittance. It became higher than what we got from oil. So what is going on here? It seems that the government are not even able to manage the citizens of this nation. Many of our young people, many of the brain drain that is going on in Nigeria is unprecedented. A lot of our best have moved out of the country because the leadership of this country is not able to manage our diversity. They are not able to manage human capital. They are not even able to manage social capital. Not to even talk about the physical capital that we have all over. They are not able to manage anything. And unfortunately, in managing those things, they have shown some level of mediocrity that is eating up what we have been able to gain in the past years. So this is very key. You know, let me just conclude. I know we have been here for a long time, but I want to say something. You know, if those of you who have read the bishop's communique in this past, we had this meeting just about 2-3 days ago, and we issued a communique. In that communique, we said something that we were quoting some other people that says that when there is a problem in a democracy, the solution has always been more democracy. But the solution that we give to our problems, it has nothing to do with democracy. Democracy in Nigeria is just election. Because there's no democracy. We go to elect somebody and we call that democracy. We have no consensus. We have no sense of purpose. Leadership is not about power. It is about purpose. Leadership is not even about popularity. It is about integrity. So, the present struggle that is going on in our country is a big struggle for the soul of this country. We are not even managing that well. Because some people think that if you want to win the struggle for the soul of this country, that you have to fight, you have to destroy, you have to use every political means to lord it over other people and to cheat, to favor your own people, or to do things in some certain ways that are against justice, against fair play. Such thing cannot win the soul of this country. The only thing that is going to win the soul of this country is going to be good character, dignity, respect for human dignity. The only thing that is going to win the soul of Nigeria is going to be the value that we hold dearly, the value that we all subscribe to, that is going to take your fellow citizen as your brothers and sisters, being each other's keeper. These are the things that will win the soul of this country. I think we have spoken in the air for too long. Let the president and all the cabal that are around him know that AK-47 cannot win the soul of Nigeria. It's not possible. What is going to win the soul of this country is going to be character, it's going to be dignity, it's going to be the way we treat one another. And even that, the government is not managing it well. How can we manage the unbelievable energy of the young people in this country, the intellectuals who are now running out of this country in drones? They are working and doing great all over the country, all over Europe and America. Some of the greatest minds, they are there. All they do now is to send something back home to Nigeria to help their families. And that has been the situation. And what they sent into this country for this past year was higher than oil. For goodness sake, this is the problem. How are we going to bring back this battalion of great minds that have left this country? Who is going to bring them back? Who is going to manage them to be able to change the fortune of Nigeria? These are the questions that we must continue to ask ourselves. Until we begin to teach values, we begin to teach moral values, and the government begin to imbibe the moral authority that government needs to be able to govern. And that is why we think we do not have an enabling government in Nigeria. So, some of you will be shocked to hear that the backbone of American economy are the small businesses. That in that society, the little and small businesses that are here and there that people do contributes to the economy even more than the large companies and all that. And in Nigeria today, we have so many people who engage in, who doesn't even have anything they do. And many states of Nigeria are collapsing because they can't even pay salary. Here, in those states, the doctors and the workers have not been paid for 5 months. And the doctors have down tools. All our hospitals are being shut down. And this is the situation. What do we do? Are we going to continue this way? We must bring everybody together to the round table and begin to take charge of the life of the people, of the life of the state, and begin to think positively on how we can improve the quality of our country, the quality of the commitment, how to manage the commitment that everyone should have in building up a better society. Well, I have so many other points here, but I haven't looked at it critically. I think government is not the solution, but government is the problem. And remember, you are clapping, but you chose the government in power. You did. So this is the situation. I thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to air a few views. And I hope that we will begin as a diocese to work together. We have done so much together, and I've always emphasized it. Many of you, if you listen to me carefully in all my comments and interventions, I've always talked about being intelligent together, working together, and planning and strategizing together so that we can win the soul of this country together until we begin to see and treat one another with dignity and respect and not taking advantage of one another, which is the highest thing going on in our society today. People taking advantage of each other and just treating one another like as if we are in a kind of a society that is not guided by values. So please let us begin to look inwardly and work with the church. Got to a point in this diocese, I could no longer look at myself in the mirror without challenging myself. The diocese is a poor diocese, but still we went ahead to begin the youth empowerment program, educating our youth, working with them, and even looking for funds to empower them, train them, so that they can be positively engaged in trying to provide livelihood for themselves. Until we begin to care about one another and try to sacrifice for the growth of all, we will continue to languish this way. Well, I'm so happy to hear one of the panelists talk about the budget. The budget of our country is a moral authority. It's a moral document. That the budget document is a moral document. Well, may God help us. I don't know how, because the lopsidedness in some of those documents and also in the budget sometimes does not create wealth. There's a way you manage human beings. You have them so many in this society. How do you manage the citizen of this country to create wealth? Nigeria is a poor country, for crying loud. We are not a rich country. We are a very poor country. Then we go struggling for the little wealth we have that is not enough for anything. And the government is so comfortable in not organizing the people in such a way that we can create wealth. And this country is a very wealthy country. It's not just about exploring the natural resources alone, because we will soon deplete them and there will be nothing left. How do we manage our human resources, which has been abandoned and has been taken over by Canada, by UK, by America, and by so many other countries of the world? Well, thank you so much. And I hope that we will continue this discussion. And very soon we begin to act in the right direction so that we can rebuild our nation in the path of love, justice, and growth. Thank you.
You can take it away, Ether.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us and for participating in this very passionate and interesting discussion. I would like to thank our panelists on behalf of the Pulte Institute. I'd also like to thank our partners, the De Nicola Center and the Catholic Diocese of Ondo and the Bishop for honoring us with his presence today. I'd also like to thank Father Fidelis for his expert planning and putting this all together, and for the media team for helping us make this a truly successful hybrid event so that we could join you virtually in Nigeria. I will be sending an email to everyone who has registered with a link to the recordings from all of the sessions. Those will be made available to you as soon as we can. So please do reach out if you have any questions. And with that, I'd like to wrap up, and I hope you all have an excellent rest of your day. And I do hope to meet with you again soon, either virtually or in person. Thank you so much for participating.
Thank you for having me.